Today is about mold. If you struggle with mold toxicity, think you might live in a moldy building. If you watch Tuesday's show all about the symptoms of mold toxicity, and you are here today, today's the day you can get some additional questions answered. If you missed that and you suspect it, make sure you go back and watch Tuesday's show. It's in our archive video library. Now, beyond that, some housekeeping. If you're new to the show, any questions game, if I can answer it, I will. Make sure that you be kind to your neighbors, and if you've got commentary, that's great. Chime into the chat and add your experience in. We like that too. So let's dive into your questions. Night terrors in a toddler. Any connection between nighttime terrors and food allergy or intolerances? Absolutely yes. I've seen this numerous times in babies and kids. Largely associated with gluten. So gluten has been the thing I have clinically seen the most associated with nighttime terrors. Also B vitamin deficiency. And I think that's why the gluten is notorious for causing vitamin and mineral deficiency, particularly B vitamins. And so this is one of the connections. So vitamin B deficiencies, particularly B12 and vitamin B1, we've seen clinically cause increased nightmares, but gluten as a whole, most common. For a friend with chronic fatigue syndrome, conventional medicine doesn't help. Do you have success with those types of patients? All the time, Melinda. Chronic fatigue is easy. Most of the time, chronic fatigue syndrome is a scapegoat diagnosis. It's where somebody's tired a lot. Obviously, they may have other subtle symptoms or symptoms that doctors don't quite diagnose as a disease in and of themselves. Things like brain fog and generalized fatigue don't make a diagnosis for doctors. So chronic fatigue syndrome is kind of a really easy way for a doctor to stamp or label somebody. And then generally from there, it goes into a psychosomatic, go see your psychiatrist because there's nothing we can do for you. But the vast majority of people that I have seen with chronic fatigue get better they're poisoning themselves, and oftentimes they don't even realize it. They're poisoning themselves with their own food, and they have food reactions. Oftentimes they have vitamin or mineral deficiencies are very, very common, especially around certain B vitamins, particularly vitamin B1, vitamin B12. We see that very frequently. But also, many of these people are in mold. And as we were talking about mold symptoms, as a matter of fact, I presented research on Tuesday actually documenting two researchers who have found that the majority of patients that they see clinically with a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome actually have elevated mold toxins in their bodies. And so it's also been my experience. We see that on a very frequent basis. But chronic fatigue syndrome and ME, which is kind of a cousin of chronic fatigue, both of those conditions, very, very easy to manage. In my experience, and it's unfortunately in mainstream, it's a medical no man's land, and those people struggle for years. But those types of people should get themselves to functional doctors quickly as they possibly can. And those of you watching this, if you ever, work up the gumption and you feel like you want to work with me or one of the members of my Origins team, just reach out to us. We'll put a number here in the feed for you, and you can reach out to our clinic and find out what it's all about. I've heard if you have lived in mold, have been remediated with confirmation that one will still need to leave the home because the body remembers and will not be able to heal. Is that true? No. I mean, I don't know where you heard that, Tammy, but I'm just going to be honest. That's a ridiculous notion. The body doesn't remember your house as I mean, there could be a psychosomatic association that a person develops becoming sick in their home, but it's not. And if that's the case, if somebody just wants to get out of the home because they feel like the home destroyed them, then that psychosomatic connection, yes, but that's mental, not mold. If you have successful remediation, if mold is what caused the illness or mold toxins is what caused the illness, then you should be able to rejoin the home or go back into the home and recover. But failed remediation happens all the time. And depending on how they remediated and what kinds of follow-up tests were done to confirm remediation success, it's been my experience in many of the cases that I've seen of mold toxicity and this was even in my own case. They come in after the remediation is done, and generally they run an air test. And if the air test comes back negative, they put a stamp of approval on the remediation. That's a terrible way to do post-remediation testing, because air testing is very inaccurate. And in the case of our home, this guy, he almost killed my whole family. Honestly, he came in, they were running air scrubbers, these big, massive air filters they were running in my house to clean the air after they had done some HEPA cleaning and HEPA vacuuming. And he comes in with his air test. He turns off the machine, the air scrubber, and then immediately proceeds to do the air test. And so my wife is there with him. She's like, won't that create a flawed test result? And he's like, no, this is the way we all do it. And he was full of it. It's not how you should do it. You don't do post-remediation air testing by immediately testing the air after you've just turned off an air scrubber. Of course, the air is going to look cleaner in that particular room when you run that test, but it doesn't mean the mold is gone. So you've got to be really careful with who you hire to do your post-remediation investigation. So the way this process works is, if you find mold in your house, you find out where the mold is. That's step one. Step two is find out why it grew. That's typically going to be moisture. There's a moisture problem in the home for whatever reason. There's 1,000 reasons that could be the case. And then step three is you remove the mold while simultaneously fixing the moisture issue. And then step four is you have an independent mold assessor come back into the home and make sure the work was done properly. And whatever you do, don't hire a moron who's just going to come in and do an air test and tell you things are clean. A post-remediation mold assessment should be visible. That mold inspector, yes, they can do an air test, but shouldn't rely on an air test. They should be doing something called MSQ-PCR. They should be potentially doing cultures. They should have an infrared camera. They should have hygrometers to measure humidity to make sure that all of those issues are straightened out and squared away, so that you don't end up thinking you're in a remediated home and only to remain ill as a result of a failed remediation that wasn't properly investigated. So those are super important procedures that you want to make sure that you're following up through. Oh man, how are you, Doc? What are your thoughts on drinking your own urine? Don't. You're going to hear good things. You're going to hear good things from a lot of people with theories. But there's a wisdom to excretion. Aside from, anybody can say something and make it sound really, in my opinion, this is the case for urine consumption. So drinking your own urine. But if you have an exit hole and your body has an exit strategy for what's coming out of that hole, and it doesn't matter what hole we're talking about, those excretion materials are not designed for your consumption to improve your health, period. End of story. I don't care. We could doll it up and we could say that there are certain ingredients in urine that can have medicinal impact or effect, but you don't need to drink your own piss to heal. If you want to heal, you've got to figure out what's triggering the illness. And, when we look at what are triggering people's illnesses, the inflammation, it's food, it's the chemicals, some of them in the food, but also environmental, and chemicals like heavy metal toxins or mold toxins, etc. So food, chemicals. Number three is microbes. Number four is nutritional deficiency. And number five is spiritual and emotional problems, if we want to add a fifth trigger in there. But those five categories have to be investigated. Drinking your piss is not a solution. And there's plenty of people that'll swear by it, because when people do a thing, they want to, there's a whole psychology behind, I did it, you should do it too. And you guys got to be careful when you're out on the internet and you're learning and trying to educate yourself. And there are a lot of different people that are out there that are, many of them, selling things. And there's nothing wrong with selling, but be cautious of those messages, because I don't know, I'm very opinionated about this one, but drinking your own urine is not going to create health. Don't do it. I don't think it's going to create illness, but I don't think it's going to benefit you. And it's just, there are other problems associated with it. I just wouldn't recommend. What causes thyroid nodules? Lots of things. Iodine deficiency, iodine toxicity, Gluten can cause thyroid nodules. Certain thyroid nodules, certain types of bacteria, yeast overgrowth can cause them. Selenium deficiency, inositol deficiency can contribute to thyroid nodules. Lots of different things. This is where testing becomes your friend, because it's not it's not a singular factor issue. It's a multifactorial issue. What could be the cause of shortness of breath besides asthma or COPD? So, I mean, mold, Christine, is a tremendous cause, because mold, inspiration of mold spores and mycotoxins can cause inflammatory airway disease, leading to shortness of breath. But another big one, and very common one, is anemia. Anemia is where you don't carry oxygen efficiently. Your red blood cells aren't carrying oxygen efficiently to your tissues, and so you're basically you're walking around. There's plenty of oxygen in your air around you, but your body is incapable of delivering that oxygen from your lungs to your tissues because the red blood cells have an issue. And there's different types of anemias, but some of the more common ones are vitamin B12 deficiency, folate deficiency, which is vitamin B9. You can have a vitamin B6 deficiency anemia. You can have vitamin C and vitamin E deficiency anemias. And the most common type of anemia is iron deficiency. But you can also have zinc and copper deficiencies that contribute mineral-wise to anemias as well. So probably one of the more common causes of shortness of breath that I see clinically are nutritional deficits causing those anemias, leading to that symptom. And usually it's also associated with muscle aches and muscle pains, brain fog and fatigue, even with adequate amounts of sleep. If someone has basal carcinoma from the sun damage, does it need to be taken out via operation? Could it develop into melanoma skin cancer? That's a decision you got to make. I'm really leery to answer that question. Not because it's not a good question, but because I don't want to give you a perceived medical advice on something. I would say if you have a basal carcinoma, they're relatively easy to remove, and it's not necessarily a bad idea. But ultimately, what you have to think about, Mara, is why did you have it? Is it really sun damage? Most people will attribute the blame to the sun, but I don't. I don't attribute the blame of sun damage creating it. It's not to say that sun burning can't contribute to changes in skin that are potentially carcinogenic, but a lot of people eat horribly, and it's not the sun that's causing their problem. It's their diet that's creating a lack of ability to protect the skin from the sun. The sun itself isn't the evil guy. It's for many, it's the diet. It's the seed oils. It's the hydrogenated fats. It's the lack of vitamins and minerals. And the inflammatory foods and chemical exposures, and the sunscreens that have, horrific cancer-causing ingredients, and not really the sun. So I'd encourage you to go back and watch my class on light as medicine. And I'd also encourage you to watch my skin class. We did a whole class on skin where you can do a deeper dive and get a better justification to the answer to those questions you have. Does it mean that there's no remedy for mold infection in a building but to demolish it? So first of all, I want to be clear about the language, because you're using the word mold infection, and I'm not sure what you mean by that. So I just want to add my own clarity so that we're, whatever you meant, we're speaking the same language. So buildings can be mold infested. Humans can have mold infection. So if you look at an infection, would be the mold is growing inside your body or growing on your body. That, if we're using that term infection, that's sometimes referred to as mycosis. But a building infestation isn't the same thing. And I just want to be clear with my words, because I'm not sure exactly what you meant. If you have a mold infestation in a building, that can be remediated depending on what caused it, depending on the nature of the problem, the scope of the damage. Now, like in my case, my house was so flawed with its construction that there was no option for remediation. It just, the foundation had moisture issues. So, I mean, to fix that, you've got to rip the foundation out, and you've got to report it, and that's a teardown job. That's not the case for most people, but it was in my situation. So remediation can be done, but if a person has a mold infection, because they're immunocompromised, because they were living in mold, in order to treat that mold infection successfully, they still need to get out of that moldy environment. And so getting out of the moldy environment can mean multiple things. It can mean moving to a safe environment that's clear. It could also mean remediating that moldy environment so that that person can then be successful at treating that infection. So I'm not sure what you meant, but that's the answer. My son has a newer house and I noticed black in the windowsills, and his son is autistic. I thought it was dirt from trees. So Tanya, one of the things that you can do if you want to confirm whether or not it's mold, I mean, it could be dirt. It's a possibility, although mold is linked to autism, as I showed in Tuesday's class. There's research now showing that, and we've seen it in many. There's a company called J3 Eurofins, Eurofins. If you hire a mold inspector, this is who a lot of mold inspectors are using to do actual swab analyses, where they take a swab sample and they send it to Eurofins and they culture it out under, or they look at it under a microscope and they determine whether or not there's any mold present. So I would get a sterile Q-tip, and I would take several samples from different windows and put them in a sealed Ziploc bag, and then send those to Eurofins J3. And it'll cost you about $25 a sample. It's cheaper than if you hired somebody, but start there first. Just confirm, is this mold or is this not? And if it comes back mold positive, you probably got your son's probably got a problem in that newer house. They probably installed the windows incorrectly. I'm going through something like that right now, where we had some issues we're building a new practice, building a new office for my clinic. And, we're monitoring the build very tightly. And so one of the issues that's recently come up is some of the windows weren't properly installed. And that's a major catastrophe if it goes uncaught, right? Because that window is supposed to create a barrier between the external environment and the internal environment. And if you've got leaks or gaps or holes that lead to condensation, then you're going to get mold growth. And that's going to potentially be very problematic. So at any rate, Eurofins J3, Q-tip swabs, send those off, get a confirmation, yay or nay. If it's negative, maybe rethink it. If it's positive, hire a certified mold assessor or an IEP. And, these guys can come in and they can do more diligent type of testing to not only ascertain the mold situation, but also to ascertain why, what actually is the problem. Is obstructive cardiomyopathy an autoimmune disease? So it depends. What's the obstruction? If you've got vascular damage, there's lots of reasons why you could have a vascular obstruction, and some are autoimmune and some are not. So it depends on what the obstruction is. Maybe be more clear, Diane, in your question, and I could give you a little bit more insight. How long does it take to get mold out of your body? So clarification, is it mold that we're getting out, or is it mold toxins that we're getting out? So Mary Ellen, it's important to differentiate, because some people that are living in mold have a mold infection and they have mold toxins in their body. So there's two things there, right? Mold toxins or a mold infection. So mold infections, generally, depending on the nature of them and how severe they are, some of them can be life-threatening. As an example, aspergillomas in the lungs, which are fungal balls that basically grow inside of somebody's lungs, those can kill a person. I mean, there's like a 60% mortality rate if that's bad enough. So that's one of those things where you need to seek out medical care very, very quickly. If you're talking about like toenail infections, those can take a few months, but you've got to be out of the mold. So whether it's mold infection or a mold toxin that we're trying to remove, number one rule is always be out of the environment that caused it in the first place. This is where people fail many times that we see, is they're not out of the environment yet. They're trying to treat something without treating the driving force behind the condition. So how long does it take? So it's a great question. How long does it take to get mold toxins out of the body? I've seen it happen in as few as 6 weeks. And I've seen it take as long as up to over a year, depending on several factors, depending on a person's detoxification capacity, depending on whether or not a person is changing their diet and also following a mold-free diet. It's very important because mold toxins, you can be overburdened by a home with mold growing in it, but then you can also be eating mold toxins. And once your body's hypersensitized, your immune system is going to stay hyperreactive unless you deal with both, right? So you not only have to get out of the environment, but you also have to change your diet for a long enough period of time to then extrapolate those toxins out, simultaneously allowing your immune system to calm down so that you can recover. So it depends. So the other variables would be, are you traveling? Are you visiting places that might also be contaminated with mold? I've seen cases where people struggled with it because they were consuming high mold foods. So those are all the variables. That's the devil in the details, right? But if we're talking about the super compliance, fantastic, we're out of the mold, we're not eating mold. How long does it take to do a detoxification? Oh, typically 6 months. Somewhere between 3 and 6 months is pretty typical if all things are, let's just call them, perfect. But everybody's journey can be different depending on those variables. Unfortunately, we don't live in a bubble where we can control all the variables. So anyway, I hope that gives you at least an estimated range that you can work from. So Lyme, going back to the cardiomyopathy, obstructive cardiomyopathy. So the theory then is that if Lyme treatment, so I imagine that you had Lyme treatment using either antibiotics or some other type of major herbal protocol, depending on what kind of doctor you visited. Lyme is inflammatory. So, Lyme drives an autoimmune inflammatory response that certainly can contribute to that. So in that sense, it's infection-induced autoimmune obstruction. But also the treatment, if it's heavy antibiotics can disrupt the microbiome and contribute to the development of autoimmune. So in your case, it very well could be, Diane, autoimmune in that nature. My question's about mold. What's the symptoms of the disease? You need to go back and watch Tuesday's show. I spent an hour and a half, Rax, going through that. Can we put a link up for Tuesday's show for Rax? And is there a relationship between mold and autoimmunity? Absolutely. Tremendous relationship. Mold is a major driver of autoimmune reactions. I left my home because of mold. My family did not, because they are not affected. My question is, should they leave the home too, even though they don't have any issues to their health? Well, we're doing remediation soon. It's a tough one to answer, Marie. If it were my family, I'd get them out. I mean, that's my answer, plain and simple. If the mold is bad enough to make one person sick, it's ultimately going to poison the remainder of the family members. It's a time and dose exposure issue. Usually, when the woman is affected, and this is maybe, don't take it in a sexist way, but many of the women that I see that are affected by mold they're stay-at-home mothers, and they're there all day. That's what they do. They take care of their home. And if their home has mold in it and they're there all day 24/7, they don't ever get a reprieve or a break. And so they're getting a longer exposure. They're getting usually a higher dose exposure over time. And so they're the ones that are the canaries of the family. They typically get affected more, and they get affected first. But if we multiply this out over a long enough period of time, are the other members of your family also going to be eventually affected? Most likely, yes. There's, if you look at what some doctors are saying, is that there's a genetic component to reactivity to mold. And I don't disagree that there's some genetic component, but mold toxins are poisonous no matter who you are, genetic component or not. And we know that. We've studied that. It's been studied extensively in both animals and post studies have been done in humans. You can't give humans mold toxins and monitor them for symptoms, but you can take humans that we know were exposed to mold toxins, and you could reverse engineer. And those studies that have reverse engineered human exposure to mold toxins, it's not good. And genetic component or not, it's not good. So it's just a matter. So it depends on when you're getting the remediation. If it's happening relatively quickly, maybe you have less to worry about for your family. But I don't recommend anybody stay in a home where there's remediation going on, because once they start cracking open walls, even if they build a containment around it, containments are not perfect. When you start opening up wall cavities and start pulling mold out and cleaning these types of things, you run the risk of of basically exposing the other members who are still in that home to more. So there's a woman I interviewed for our documentary, and we'll post this interview later. But this is exactly what happened to her family. Is the remediators did a horrible job. They were unprofessional, and they came out and they didn't put up proper containment, and they started ripping into, her. It was a kitchen island in this case. They ripped into it and proceeded to contaminate the whole home even worse, and made other family members sick too. So, remediation is no joke, and you really want to protect your family when they're doing that work. It's just not my recommendation to stay in it if they're remediating. It's bad enough you need to get everybody out when they're doing the work. Anyway, I hope that helps you. I know it's a tough decision to make, but especially when other people aren't feeling bad, it makes the decision even tougher sometimes. Will putting items in the sun remove the mycotoxins? No, they won't. Mycotoxins, I mean, they can last for years. I think one study I read was as high as some toxins can, it takes up to 10 years to degrade them, naturally degrade them. So putting them in the sun isn't going to do much. You need to clean the items. You need to clean them, and you do that with microfiber. You can use HEPA vacuums and microfiber to clean most non-porous items that are contaminated with mycotoxins. But the sun's not going to take care of it by itself. How much quercetin and vitamin C do I need to take to help me deal with mold exposure in my house? I need to take them both at the same time. Ideally, yes, take them both at the same time. And, I would take about 1 gram of quercetin to 2 grams of vitamin C 3 times to 4 times a day. Now, that being said, you want to be careful with the vitamin C. Some people need less. Vitamin C at higher doses can cause the gastric gas and rumbling, and in some cases even might cause loose bowels or diarrhea. So with the vitamin C, it's not a one size fits all. With quercetin, about 3 to 4 grams a day is pretty good for most adults, and they tolerate it really well, and they do well with that. But with the vitamin C, it's a range, anywhere between 3 and 10, sometimes even more. But 3 and 10 grams a day is a pretty good place to start. So take them together, but space out your dosing, especially on the vitamin C. Don't take 10 grams of vitamin C at once. You'll be running to the bathroom pretty quickly if you do. So, keep those things in mind. How much, let's see, answer that one. Do you think mold and mycotoxin exposure could cause non-celiac gluten sensitivity genes to turn on, thus making someone develop symptoms when eating grains? Actually, I think it's the opposite. I think it's that gluten sensitivity creates a scenario when people are exposed that drives intestinal permeability that opens up the gut. So now any exposures that the body doesn't like have a free rein to get into the bloodstream and create a bigger problem. But also, one of the things that we know, and this has been researched, is that, and not that mold and growing in your house and yeast growing in your body are the same thing, but Candida albicans specifically has been studied in that one of the toxins that it produces is called it's a hyphal wall protein, or an HWP, but that looks like gluten. So there's what we call molecular mimicry between the gluten and the yeast protein. And so I haven't seen any research looking at environmental mold exposure proteins or substrates mimicking gluten. We haven't seen anything come out yet like that. But we know that the yeast Candida can mimic gluten. So there's that component. But also, grains are heavily contaminated with mycotoxins, and that's one of the issues. So there's am I gluten sensitive issue, and many people are. And then there's am I in mold and being exposed to mold also through the food that I'm consuming issue, right? So it's not so much that I think that mold causes gluten sensitivity as much as that I think gluten sensitivity makes one more susceptible to mold poisoning, and that gluten comes in grains that are also contaminated with mold and mycotoxins that can also exacerbate the situation. Let's see. Gluten has been a concern. My little grandson and I experienced it firsthand last night. Awful. I had such terrors at night as a kid. No, I guess that's just a comment. Thanks for sharing your experience. Hi, Anita from Michigan here. How concerned should one be with dry edges of black mold on windowsills due to condensation over winter? Very concerned. You need to figure out why your house is condensating. Those windows are not sealed properly. And so that's most likely the culprit. And if they're condensating on the outside, that's not the issue. But if they're condensating on the inside, you got a problem. You got an airflow problem. And if you've got black mold in that windowsill, you've got a health problem coming your way. What should an ERMI score be post remediation? It's a tough question. Ideally, an ERMI score post remediation ideally should be under 2.5. But an ERMI score of 2.5 doesn't always. So the score itself is weighted on which species are there, which types of molds, et cetera. And so more important than the actual score is actually looking at what spores are still there and in what quantities. Because I've seen cases where an ERMI score was pretty decent, but there was, on the PCR aspect of the ERMI, there was the presence of mold we wouldn't want to see. And even though the score was okay, the presence of that mold wasn't. So it's not as simple as any ERMI score below this passes. This is why post-remediation investigation shouldn't rely solely on an ERMI. No post-remediation investigation should rely solely on any one test, right? Because if the scope of the post-remediation inspection needs to be, was the moisture problem solved? So whatever was causing the moisture problem, maybe it was an improperly installed air conditioner, maybe it was window seals were not adequate, maybe it was an old roof leak or something along that line where there was water penetration. Maybe it was basement where water was coming into a basement creating humidity. That water issue has to be solved. Once the water and so first you have to understand it, then you have to fix it. So that's part of the job of the post-remediation inspection is, was the water issue solved? Beyond that, was the mold that was there from the previous water issue, was it cleaned up properly? Was it cleaned up effectively? Was the air scrubbed? Were the walls and the floors and everything HEPA vacuumed? Were all the contaminated items removed and cleaned properly? So it's not just as simple as an ERMI score. That's what makes this so complex. It's always the case. The devil's in the details. And so if you're looking at just your ERMI as post-remediation evidence to move back in, it's a mistake. A mycotoxin urine tested post-remediation and detox protocol and went from 31 to 21 in 2 months. Should I continue to mycotoxin urine test every 3? We generally, in our practice, Lynn, we do every 12 weeks. We do we do detox followed by a 12-week assessment, depending on the results, followed by, if they're still positive, we keep going. But make sure that if you're working with a doctor to do this, make sure you're not eating ochratoxin A. It's very common to get exposure to ochratoxin A if you like coffee. And we've seen coffee contaminate people's samples. It's also important that when you're doing your mycotoxin test that you follow specific diet instructions. So whoever you're working with and doing your testing, you need to make sure you're not eating the mycotoxins. That can create a lot of this in your testing that leads to a lot of confusion. So make sure you're off of what we know to be high mold toxin contaminated foods for several weeks before you're submitting your urine samples. What can cause dizziness? Lots of things. Anemia can cause dizziness. We mentioned anemia earlier, Sorrel, where different vitamin and mineral deficiencies can contribute to inability of your red blood cells to carry oxygen efficiently, and that lack of oxygen getting to your brain can contribute to dizziness. B12 deficiency is a real common cause of dizziness, as is vitamin B1 deficiency. You could have neck issues. We've seen neck herniations, disc herniations, neck sprain strains if you've been in a car accident or had a nutritional causes of an enlarged heart with congestive heart failure is vitamin B1 deficiency. Also, sometimes that disease is referred to as beriberi, the cardiac type of beriberi, which is, which is what's ironic there, Diana, is many doctors put patients on diuretics to treat their blood pressure problem, or even in some cases to treat their enlarged heart problem. And diuretics cause beriberi. That's one of the side effects of diuretics, is they deplete vitamin B1. Actually, there's some research that shows they inhibit vitamin B1 uptake into cardiac cells themselves directly. So any of you on a diuretic, if you're not getting your B1 levels checked, if you're not supplementing with B1 as a preventative, I would highly encourage you to look into that and talk with your doctor about it. Not that you need permission to take B1 from any doctor. It's not dangerous to do that, and it doesn't interfere with your medication. But I just believe in open, honest communication. And if you're working with somebody, as a healthcare provider, you just, when I'm working with somebody, I want to know all the things they're doing, regardless of whether I would agree with it or not agree with it. It's not my place to agree or disagree so much. It's my place to understand all the variable factors that might be affecting that person's health, and then be able to give them guidance based on what I know. So it's the same is true even of allopathic doctors who maybe philosophically are going about it in a different way. It's still important to have that conversation. You've mentioned that too much coffee is bad. Do you mean just caffeinated coffee? Is decaf okay? No, Thomas, what I was referring to is that coffee as a crop, the way it's grown and the way it's stored, is very commonly contaminated with mold and mycotoxins. So from that perspective, that has nothing to do with caffeination. That has strictly to do with the potential of it to be contaminated with mold and mycotoxins, because the question was around mold and mycotoxins. Now, is coffee bad as a whole overall? No, I don't think so. I mean, there's actually some really good literature and research that reasonable amounts of coffee, a cup a day, can actually improve outcome parameters and longevity. So I'm not an anti-coffee person, although I think for many people, coffee becomes a delivery system of garbage, right? So if you look at what is coffee delivering, it's processed milk, processed sugar, processed sweeteners, the fake milks that people put in them, or the hydrogenated vegetable oils labeled as creamers that people put in them. I think it's not the coffee, it's what you put in it too. But coffee can be problematic for some, and caffeine, especially if you've been under stress for a really long time, caffeine is a stimulant to the adrenal glands, and if you're already overstimulated, that could be a problem. Some of the instant coffees can be contaminated with grain, especially wheat. Sometimes they're there on purpose. And so there's just a lot of variable factors around coffee. I've done videos on coffee that you might find useful or helpful in kind of trying to determine for you whether it's the right move. Do you think that diatomaceous earth in the windowsills that are black will help? No, not at all, because you got to figure out why the mold is growing. Diatomaceous earth isn't going to do anything other than probably create more clutter for more mold to grow. I mean, mold will grow where there's high variable surface area, and that's not really going to stop it from growing. I tested low for all the B vitamins, vitamin A, C, E, manganese, and zinc, despite a nutrient-rich diet and no celiac disease. I took B complex for a year off and on. Should I take separate high-dose Bs? Possibly. Remember, there's 3 reasons people develop deficiency of nutrients. Number 1, you're not eating enough. You may be following a nutrient-rich diet, but if you're not eating adequate calories as a whole, you may not be getting what your body actually needs. Number 2, you can have gut damage for many reasons, and gut damage can contribute to malabsorption, digestive problems, etc. So it doesn't have to just be gluten related. There are lots of reasons why people might have nutritional deficiencies. And even though you don't have celiac disease, doesn't mean you don't have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. I see this all the time. As a matter of fact, it's estimated that between, upwards of, even higher than this, but this was published by a group of GI doctors in the World Journal of Gastroenterology, where they estimated, I think it was 13% of the population has non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Only 1% of the population has celiac disease. So non-celiac gluten sensitivity is actually much more common than celiac disease. And I think, unfortunately, that gets missed by a lot of people. They think, oh, I don't have celiac, I don't have to worry about the gut damage. But you can have non-celiac and still develop malabsorption problems and gut problems, maybe just not as severe in terms of symptoms as somebody with celiac might develop. But then there's a third reason why people can develop deficiencies, and that's pre-existing underlying inflammation driving the need for more nutrients, despite the fact that you're eating a nutrient-rich diet. So let me give you an example of something that can drive underlying inflammation that would increase nutrient need. Exercise. We saw this in athletes. I used to work with a lot of professional athletes early on in my career, and we would do customized formulations for professional football and baseball players. And what we found was they were eating 8,000 calories. There was not a shortage of calories, but there was so much physical activity involved with these athletes that they were burning through their nutrients very quickly. And so despite the fact that we're getting enough food, they weren't getting the nutrients to offset the stress caused by the level of exercise they were doing. And exercise is just one example. There are also people that have stressful jobs. There are people that, sometimes have injuries, strains, sprains, and other things. And those all kind of put a demand on the nutritional status. And so despite the fact that maybe you're eating really well, you could have some of those other underlying issues that are driving some of those deficits for you as well. Let's see. What is the very best top 3 things to do as soon as you move out of mold? Number 1, sigh. Take a big, deep breath of clean, fresh, non-moldy air and just be at peace for a moment. Like, just let it sit in, let it sink in. Because being in mold is so stressful in so many ways. If you haven't been through it, you really don't understand it. You can try to understand it. And I thought I did until it happened to me, but you don't. But top 3 things. Number 1, start a good detoxification protocol using binding agents and powerful liver support. Things like N-acetylcysteine, glutathione, alpha-lipoic acid, vitamin C, binders like fulvic acid and zeolite and, granular activated carbon or charcoal. There are other binders too. There are fiber binders, but many people that have been in mold don't do well with fiber binders at all. That's why they go carnivore. They feel so much better without the plant material because they're one of the least contaminated food groups is meat, among other reasons. So do a good detox or start a good detox. And part of that would include be outside a lot. So your detox should incorporate ideally hours a day outside, being exposed to sun both directly and indirectly. You don't have to stay out at the hottest time of the day and burn yourself, but be outside a lot. Sunlight heals, infrared heals. It accelerates energy production by your cells. It penetrates through bone, and it accelerates ATP production, which allows your body to kick into a higher gear of energy and helps and supports the healing process and the detoxification process. Sweat a lot. Whether it's through exercise tolerance or if you can't yet tolerate exercise, consider investing in infrared sauna and sweat 15 to 20 minutes a day. Don't go too hard, too fast. Some people don't do well with that, but make it a consistent part of your detox. Make sure you're hydrating with salts, because the more you can flush your kidneys, the more these toxins you can push out of the body as well. Like, these are what we would call non-negotiable fundamentals. So you also got to be on a clean diet. So there's really 6 things: the right diet, mold-free diet, grain-free diet. Number 2, exercise to tolerance and sweat. Number 3, sunshine. Number 4, lots of sleep. You can take naps. Don't get guilty about needing naps if you're tired. Like, take those naps and embrace them. Number 5, make sure your water's filtered. And number 6, make sure your air's filtered. Even if you're out, of the mold, still filter the air in your house, because there's probably VOCs and other chemicals you're being exposed to as well. Those 6 things, that's it. I mean, there's not like 3 magic bullet things. It's those 6. Those 6 are the non-negotiables. And everyone should be doing those 6, whether they're in mold or whether they're not in mold. But, it's the top priority. And a lot of people get out of mold, and then they just want to passively do a detox by taking a bunch of supplements. And that's not the ideal solution. You've got to do active things as well to help that stuff get out of you. And you have to rebuild your body. Remember, the way we rebuild our body after being in mold is we go and we stimulate it, we move it. Again, it's the tolerance, but the more we stimulate our body, the better it's going to heal. Hi, Dr. Osborne. Does high LDL only depend from the liver's health, as if it wasn't enough, or are there other causes? Christiana, I would encourage you to watch my video on the cholesterol myth. If we could maybe drop that link in for Christiana. I don't recommend chasing LDL at all. I think it's a pipe dream and a waste of time. And I think we've been chasing it for 50 years in medicine, and it hasn't led to less heart attacks, and hasn't led to less strokes. It hasn't led to less heart disease, because as a target, it's the wrong target. LDL is the kind of the classic example of guilt by association. It doesn't cause the problem. And you use LDL. I see higher LDL in mold victims all the time, and here's why. It's not that LDL is increasing their risk for problems, that their body is using LDL on purpose to try to help them cope and adapt and deal with the mold. LDL forms very important things. It helps you make testosterone and estrogen and progesterone and DHEA. It helps you make cortisol. LDL is a critical factor in how your body makes the hormones of healing and repair and stress. And so, as a typical rule, when somebody's LDL is elevated, it's probably because they're stressed in some way. There's a food or an environmental stress that's pushing their body to try to compensate for that by making more LDL as a substrate to produce these other things that are going to be helpful. So if you go around to suppressing that, what you're actually doing is you're suppressing your body's natural defense mechanism that's trying to help you. That's the gist of it. But go watch that video. We'll put a link up for you. I have peripheral neuropathy and the numbness is getting worse. What can I do? Figure out why you have it. I mean, peripheral neuropathy has many different potential triggers. Gluten is a very common cause of peripheral neuropathy. So if you're not yet on the no grain, no pain diet, go read the book. Go get you a copy of the book and check it out at a library. It's in most major libraries. You can also get it at any major book retailer or Amazon, and follow it if you're not already. Look at B vitamins. B1, B12, folate, B6 can all cause neuropathy, deficiencies, that is. You might also look into alpha-lipoic acid, has tremendous support around nerve regeneration. You might look at omega-3. Are you getting enough? Because in order for that to heal, omega is necessary, especially EPA, DHA at higher doses can be very helpful. So look at those things as potential triggers. Now, and that's if you have a chemical neuropathy. Peripheral neuropathy can also be physical, meaning you might have a disc herniation compressing a nerve. If you haven't had that ruled out, go get that ruled out too. And a good chiropractor, in a good MRI, good neurologist, any of those would be very helpful in that type of situation. Let's see here. My B1 is low and I'm taking 200 milligrams a day. How long should I continue, and what cofactors are critical? Well, if your B1 is low, at least 3 months, I'd say 3 months would be a good starting point. And then, beyond that, get it checked and monitor it. But magnesium is probably one of the most important cofactors for vitamin B1. But I would also say that B1 doesn't work solo. You need other B vitamins with that as well to optimize. So I would be looking at, I know it looks like you're taking B1 in the TTFD form, which is fine. Benfotiamine is good, but consider B complex along with it to get the other Bs with it as cofactors. Organic acid testing. First thing I would say is, if you're doing organic acid testing to try to determine your nutritional status, stop it. It's not an accurate test, and it's not an effective way to understand your biochemistry on a long haul basis. That test, if I were to run it on 10 different people and run it back to back to back several days in a row, I'd get back results that didn't match the first, that didn't match the second, that didn't match the third. It'd be all over the place. So I wouldn't use that as a means to identify nutritional deficit. But as far as just like supporting mitochondrial health, I mean, there's a lot of things that do that. I'd say you got to get clear, detailed data objectively on what it is that your body needs. And again, an organic acid, in my opinion, is not the right mechanism to measure nutritional status. How do you test for mold in your body? So lots of ways. There's not one test, but there's an array of different things that we look at, Christine. One would be just urinary mycotoxins, so measuring mycotoxins coming out of the urine. But to do that test, you have to not be eating the mycotoxins. So following a special diet before you submit a test like that's important. Number two, there are inflammatory markers that indicate the potential for mold, and but they're not direct markers. So they're indirect markers of inflammation. And those are things like C-reactive protein, TGF-beta1, C4A, and MMP9, and ferritin. So those are, all blood markers that most doctors could look up for you and could measure if you're trying to get your doctor to do that. Again, those provide insight, not direct certainty. Then there's other types of tests like antibody tests. You can do antibody tests for mycotoxins or molds. You can also do tests that would measure your brain. One of them is called a neuroquant. It's a specialized MRI that measures the volume changes in the brain that are consistent with the observation of mold-induced brain damage. So when you look at all of these things in context together, then you also take the context of what we find in that person's environment, right? So you also want to make sure that there's adequate testing happening at home. An ERMI is a screening test that can be performed, but it really, if you're trying to really get to the bottom of mold, you want to have a mold assessor do a great job. I have an article on how to hire a mold inspector for those of you interested, and we can put a link up on that article for you to be able to better kind of filter who you're going to hire, because a mold inspection can cost some money, and you don't want to throw your money away on an idiot who comes out to do an air test and calls that an inspection. That's like when a doctor does a CBC on a patient and says, oh, your blood work looks great, you must be normal, it's now all in your head, you're crazy, goes through the shrink. It's the same analogy as when the mold inspector calls an air test a mold inspection. So don't be a victim of that. Will an N95 mask help? Help with what? If you're talking about mold? No. I mean, if you're going to go into mold, if you're going to be exposed and you're in a moldy environment, you need a respirator. N95 is not going to cut it. There's too many leaks and gaps. And beyond that, mold toxins can permeate the skin. So unless you're wearing a Tyvek suit 24/7 in that environment, an N95 is, it's not going to do much. Christina says, is it possible to arrange a consultation with you if I have laboratory, international, and if I can't get labs that you recommend? If you come to my clinic or if you call my clinic, Christina, we can certainly do a consult. And if you need certain labs internationally, we don't sell labs internationally at Gluten-Free Society. So if you've been there and tried to pick up some of the things that we have available, we don't generally ship internationally at this point. But we do for our clinic clientele. So if you scheduled with me, we would be able to order, whatever testing was necessary and get it to you internationally. So that hopefully that helps give you clarity. And you can call my office. It's different than Gluten-Free Society. Sometimes people get those two confused. They're not the same, and they're different contact points and everything else. So reach out to my office, and you can get better clarity. But we see people from Europe all the time, and so just let them know that, and they can walk you through the logistics. We have a lot of mold on the outside of our building, but inside I don't see anything. Would you worry? We always have the windows open. I don't know if I'd worry, Julie. I'd say it depends, right? So mold's going to grow on the outside of a lot of buildings, depending on where the sun's hitting, depending on the weather, depending on a number of factors, depending on the substrate material, et cetera, that your building's made out of. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's inside the building is a wall that's supposed to stop it from being able to come in and grow, right? So on the outside, maybe not an issue. The question mark becomes, are there people inside that building that are getting sick mysteriously and they don't know why? Now, if that's the case, now you have to look at that outside mold on the building as a potential clue. Again, it's not, you can't confirm it definitively, but as a potential clue, and in which case bringing in an inspector to do an internal investigation would be a good idea. Does the electric car like a Tesla affect AFib and other heart problems? It can. What I would encourage anyone to do, especially if you're EMF sensitive, is to use a meter if you're considering buying that kind of car, or if you already own one, use a meter to kind of see what kind of energetic field it's throwing out. But also paying attention to whether you're driving it, whether or not your symptoms increase. Best tip to lower fasting blood sugar: build muscle. Best tip. One thing you could do would be go and lift weights. Muscle increases insulin sensitivity and improves glucose utilization. And so it pulls glucose from your blood into the muscle cell, even at rest. So a lot of people want to take berberine, and they want to do extra chromium or vanadium and B vitamins and magnesium and zinc. And those are all good things because nutritionally they're necessary to help regulate blood sugar. But you want the one thing that will do it better than everything else, it is to build lean muscle. That includes you, ladies. Don't be scared of growing too big. You're not going to become a Herculean. You need muscle mass. People need muscle mass. We live in such a sedentary world that's one of the banes of technology. That's we call the convenience tax of modern society, is loss of muscle and a decrease in quality and quantity of life as a result of all the problems associated with that loss of muscle. If your house is tested positive for mold, does the value go down, or do they say it can be fixed? It depends. I mean, it depends on what the test it is that you're talking about. Like if your house tested positive for mold, the value can vary from day to day, even on good tests, right? I mean, mold has got a personality much like a human. I mean, we learned this from Katrina, where they were analyzing different homes and doing air sampling in different homes that were flooded during Katrina in New Orleans. And one of the really unique things that they found was that at certain times of the day, the spore count would go up higher, and at other times of the day, the spore count would be lower. And it's because mold likes to party at a certain time of the day, kind of like people, right? So I'm not sure I understand your question fully, but if your house tests positive for mold and you're sick and you're in it, you need to go back to the fundamentals, determine why it grew, determine where it's at, where's the source, fix the why, remove the source, remediate the air and the walls and the furnishings, and you should be okay. It should be able to be fixed. Laura says, I cleared mycotoxins in about a year. Thanks for that feedback of your experience, Laura. What about ozone after everything has been taken care of and destroyed, or everything has been taken care of and cleaned properly? Would that be necessary in each room? I'm not a fan of ozone, Lisa. Ozone destroys the materials in your home. Ozone degrades. High doses of ozone will degrade vinyl. It will degrade the caulking. Like if you highly ozonate the silicone caulking around a window, it's going to crack and dry. And now your windows aren't good. I don't recommend using ozone indoors as a means to keep the indoor air clean. If you want a device indoors that has a good impact and a good prevention, I recommend an ion generator. Hydroxyl ion generators, I've seen them work really, really well for people. And especially when I've seen cases where people couldn't afford to get out of their mold or couldn't, they just didn't have any other options. So they use these machines at least as it's not a remediation tool, but they use it as a stopgap. And I've seen some people do well with that as a stopgap. It's still, in my opinion, it shouldn't be the end answer, but it's a far better way to go about reducing mycotoxins, because ions degrade mycotoxins much more quickly than if you were to just let them degrade naturally. So an ion generator is what I would go with over an ozone generator. Your doctor from personal experience, grateful. Okay. Doctor from personal experience, grateful for you. Wisdom. Yeah, you're welcome. What foods are high mold to be avoided? Lisa's asking. Number one, grain. I think it's depending on the research, but most researchers agree like 30% of the US or the global grain crop is contaminated with mycotoxins, 30%. So it's a hell of a risk if you're eating grain. Number two would be coffee. Number three would be peanuts. Number four would be any kind of dried fruit. So raisins, dried mango, that kind of thing. High potential for contamination. Any form of alcohol, any form of cheese. I would also look at any ultra processed food as out. There've been studies now there's newer studies coming out on ultra processed food being highly contaminated with mold. So those are a good place to start. I'd start there. There's also some research showing like dried beans and nuts sometimes are a greater risk. So if you're trying to get the best, most accurate assessment, keep those things out. This goes back to carnivore diet, guys. This is why I'm not necessarily advocating that everybody follow a carnivore diet, but why is it so popular? Mark my words today. Somebody log this, write this down. I don't know if it's going to be 5 years. I don't know if it's going to be 10, but in the next decade, you're going to see mold as the number one epidemic and health crisis in the world. It's coming because the massive scale of cheap homes, the shitty labor material that's being used, the poor quality of the laborers that are being used. These guys aren't skilled and they're framing houses incorrectly and they're putting windows in wrong and they're putting roofs on incorrectly and they're plumbing homes wrong and they're installing air conditioners incorrectly. Like, this problem is coming to a head. It's coming. Mark my words. And anyway, I don't say that to scare you all, but I lost my train of thought. So the question was about foods and mold. I'm going to back up to the next question. So rant over. If you live in a moldy environment and you move to another place, what do you do with your items that were with you? Depends on the items. I wouldn't try to save thick fabric materials like comforters or quilts, things that can't be washed easily. You can wash clothing, but I wouldn't try to wash, again, big, thick down comforters, blankets, and things of that nature. It's hard to get all that out. I would not try to preserve mattresses. I wouldn't try to preserve cushioned couches or other things. If you have heirlooms that like wood and it's not porous and you want to try to remediate those types of things, you certainly can. But those non-porous hard items can be remediated. You should try to remediate them as an attempt to save some of the value in your life, because mold is expensive. When you have to throw everything away and buy everything anew, that's not inexpensive, especially when you're considering having to buy a new house and or moving or signing a new lease or whatever it might be. That's probably good. I just moved out of a mold house after 14 years. I took nothing made of wood or paper. I mean, that, I could see if you had wood furnishings like tables and chairs, provided they didn't have, fabric and cushions on them, those kinds of things could be remediated. Not so much paper. I would leave paper behind. Yeah, everything should be washed. Don't bring in contaminated items from the home into the new home. That's another big one. People think, oh, I'll take it into the house and wash it in the new place. No, you're just recontaminating your home. Moved 12 years ago to a different state. Haven't felt great since. Work from home, 12 years. Mold tests show minor. What kind of mold tests, Heidi? You did an air test. You didn't do mold inspection if you did air tests, if you're lying in what does minor mean? Because I've seen reference ranges from one mold inspector to another be very different. I know as a general rule of thumb, any spore count inside a room of a closed-in airspace in a home above 650, 600 is probably a big problem because air samples are already notoriously falsely negative. So if you're getting up over 600 on any kind of spore count, you've got a deeper issue. But I'd consider the type of inspection you had and investigate that. If you moved and you got sick afterwards and you're working from home, like those are cardinal like things we look for, red flags that we look for in our clinic of when people get sick. Like, so if we follow their history, when did you get sick? Well, when I moved. When did you get sick? When I started working from home, right? When something substantial changed about where you spent the vast majority of your time matches or coincides with the event of illness, we now have to be thinking environmental illness. And mold is part of that. There are other environmental issues that can occur, but mold is certainly one of the big ones. Organic coffee, does it have mold also? Yes, it can. Organic doesn't mean mold-free. There's some companies that do mold testing on their coffee, and that's something that, you should be looking for if you like to drink that coffee. Heating the coffee does not kill the mold. Because it's not the mold you're really trying to kill, Thomas. It's the mycotoxins, and mycotoxins are heat stable. That's what makes them so dangerous. It's really hard to get them out once they're in. UV light doesn't really effectively kill mold. Walk outside on a sidewalk and you can see the discoloration of the cement. That's called black mold. You got mold growing on that sidewalk, and that sidewalk sits in the sun all day. So if UV light killed mold in the sun, we keep the sidewalk nice and shiny, and it does not. So don't rely on UV light as a solo device to say we're not going to have a mold problem. I've seen UV lights on jobs where the UV light had mold growing on it. So UV light is not, it's a preventative agent, but it isn't going to stop mold from growing if you have a major moisture problem. Appropriate protective equipment for someone who wants to investigate his own home. A Tyvek and a respirator. Draeger, Drager, is a company that makes really good full facial respirators. I own one. So it's those two things. So the Tyvek suit with gloves and obviously cover your feet, cover every inch of your skin because mycotoxins can absorb through it. And wear a respirator, full facial. Don't wear a partial respirator where other parts of your skin are exposed. You want the whole head covered. So the Tyvek suit with the hood, the full respirator, that's ideal. I'm in an exercise program with weights. I really struggle with the leg exercises. Is it possible that deficiencies are causing this? It's possible, yeah. I mean, you could be struggling because you're not getting enough protein, specifically the branched chain amino acids, Janet. That would be leucine, isoleucine, and valine, as well as L-glutamine. L-glutamine is not a branched chain, but it's an important one for muscle strength and recovery. So if you're struggling, consider supplementing there. You might also consider supplementing with creatine as a tool to get stronger. Creatine can help with strength improvement. So again, that's just one other aspect of what you can do. Does mold grow on roof tiles? Yeah, it can. Should only get organic whole bean. Okay, let's see. For actinos and endos, is your treatment the same as mold? As far as remediation, yeah, you still got to remove the actinobacter if it's growing on water damage building material. As far as endotoxins are concerned, I'm assuming that's what you mean, the endotoxins produced by the bacteria. Um, those are going to be neutralized ultimately if you get out of the environment. I know, I know a lot of doctors now are having their patients take 3 showers and wash themselves, an inordinate amount of times a day, fearing that actinos are growing on the skin. I would caution against that. I'm not a fan of that. I think when you strip the microbiome off of your skin, you predispose it to having other problems. And I don't think ultimately that's the solution. But with whether it's mold or whether it's actinos or other bacteria, microbial contaminants grown on water damage building materials, you have to remove those from the environment or remove yourself from the environment where they're at. And then detoxification is very similar to both. What do you recommend for venous insufficiency? Figuring out why you have it. There's reasons why. There's not like one thing I would say, do this for venous insufficiency. Something you can do just supplementally that we know helps really support that vascular health in that regard is bioflavonoids. Quercetin, being one of the most effective. Rutin and vitamin C, all very helpful in that regard. Took your genetic test and found I have 2 genes for non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Encourage people to consider this test. The report was very helpful and thorough. Well, thank you, Heidi. I thank you for sharing that. I'm glad you found help in that. What are helpful dietary changes to correct dysbiosis after an acute viral infection? I mean, eat fermented foods would be a good place to start if you're trying to just eat better for the microbiome. Um, so if you're not already doing that, you might consider something like sauerkraut. And if you're gluten sensitive, I would recommend non-dairy ferments. I don't really recommend dairy ferments in people with gluten sensitivity issues, especially post-viral infection, because that viral infection, if it's bad enough, can cause an acute opening of the gut lining and create leaky gut. And dairy proteins and leaky gut don't mix well. You could consider a probiotic. We have biotic defense and ultrabiotic defense and biotic force. There, the different reasons why you'd want to use one versus the other. But if you're talking acute, just getting over illness, take the big guns for a couple weeks. It's ultrabiotic defense. How much B1 a day? Depends. Anywhere from 100 to 300 milligrams a day, sometimes more depending on the person. But that's a good place to consider starting if you're trying to therapeutically correct a B1 deficiency. Does black mold disappear wiping it off? Go down just a little bit for me, Martin. Does black mold disappear wiping it off after spraying with vinegar? I mean, it will. It'll disappear from your vision, but the problem isn't solved, Martin. Why did it grow? People that clean mold without understanding why it grew realize that it's just going to grow back. I mean, if you didn't solve the moisture problem, the mold is not going to quit coming back. And by the time it's visible, the amount of spores present by the time it's visible is astronomical. Mold is microscopic, so it's there. It can be there for a while when you and not seeing it, because it's so small, and by the time it forms large enough communities for the naked eye to see it, you've got a hell of a problem, and you need to figure out where the moisture's coming from. But just cleaning it off with black vinegar, or I'm sorry, with vinegar, spraying and wiping with vinegar, isn't going to resolve the issue. In my experience, the mold will come from the outside inside. I mean, mold will come inside your house because you open your doors and there's mold outside, and you're going to get some mold inside. The issue isn't whether or not you have zero mold in your house. The issue is whether or not you have enough moisture in your home that allows for those mold spores that are in your home to replicate and grow out of control. And as they're doing that, start to eat and decay your house, because it's not just the mold and the mycotoxins. There's bacteria that grow alongside of mold. We mentioned earlier actinos is a type of bacteria, but there's also dead mold fragments, hyphal wall fragments. There's other chemicals and VOC-like compounds that mold make that are not mycotoxins. So there's a variety of different things. Certain bacteria produce endotoxins that can drive illness. So it's the milieu of microbial contamination eating your house from the inside out. And that happens because of water damage or because of uncontrolled moisture. So the name of the game in mold is control the moisture, control the water. If you do those two things, we're not worried about the ambient mold. We're not worried about small amounts of ambient mold. That's why you have good filtration in your HVAC system. That's why you use a MERV, high-level MERV, 13 or higher filter, a HEPA filter, because those are going to grab some of those residual things that are in your air, and they're going to trap them. And if you're changing and servicing your HVAC system really well, those don't build up over time enough to create issues. But if they've got water, your house is the food. All they need is the water. It's the water that matters. So control the moisture. My boyfriend started taking your sleep well and Ultracom to try to sleep. He wakes up all night from dreams and thinking. Since taking your stuff, he seems to be getting even less sleep. What else can he do? Well, sometimes, Polly, when we're not sleeping and he's waking and he's thinking, he may have some unresolved subconscious things his mind is trying to solve, and suppressing that with sleep agents or calmative agents may not be the right thing to do at this point. He may have to work through some of that. I would encourage you to help him explore that. I mean, there are other things that we can try to do to improve our sleep. Exercise and sunshine are crucial. Start there first if he's not doing that. Take away the blue light, especially at night. If he's not already doing that, you can attempt melatonin. You can also attempt tryptophan. Some people are nervous about melatonin, but tryptophan, which is an amino acid, sometimes helps people sleep tremendously well. But anytime somebody's waking at night, and when they're waking, their mind is really going back to the same thought or going back, trying to puzzle something out, like that shouldn't be suppressed. Sleep is important, but so too is your mind's ability to resolve conflict. And sometimes waking up is part of your brain saying, hey, I'm waking you up because you're not resolving this. Let's figure out this conflict. Is borax good for mold? It's good for washing your clothes, but I wouldn't do remediation with borax per se. After 14 years in my rental, I almost died. I just moved. God is good. Yes, there's hope. God put cures in nature. We cannot out-supplement and diet our environment. Amen to that. Number one thing you can do in mold is get out. Can one get mold in the brain? Yes. Yes, there are lots of case studies in the medical literature of brain mold. And yes, it can kill you. It's why it's so important to get out. Again, the component with mold is, and I don't say all of this to scare everyone, but the problem with mold is if it's bad enough in your home for long enough, bad enough for long enough equals immunosuppression. Initially, you get an immune system that's hypersensitized. So you start developing rare and esoteric and strange autoimmune diseases, and nobody can figure out why. And your doctors are just pumping you full of steroids and antibiotics and creams if you're getting rashes, and they're not really driving to the core of the reason as to why the problem is there. And so you're suppressing your immune system, but you're living in an environment that also suppresses your immune system. And so once you've had enough immune suppression, what lies in the wake is cancer and mold infestation of your body, right? What's called mycosis. But that's late stage. It's not early stage. Most people aren't in mold for a year, and now all of a sudden they've got mold colonizing their lungs, and there's a 60% mortality rate. This is something that happens over years of time. It's a long game in terms of that immunosuppression. So That's what makes it so dangerous, because it's insidious, because you could struggle with an autoimmune, what you're being diagnosed with as an autoimmune problem for 10, 15, 20 years before the immune system really crashes. And then by that time, you've been in that environment for so long, most people aren't even thinking about environmental illness, including doctors. They're just thinking you have this weird autoimmune disease that's just not really been responsive. Why don't you try to get better sleep? Why don't you try to go talk to a psychiatrist about your stress levels? Like, that's the solution in mainstream. It's what they push people to do. Is they don't push for answers. They push for, if we can't control your symptoms with chemicals, as a doctor, most of them don't want to keep seeing you because you frustrate them and they don't know what to do. And that's, it's just the nature of it. I'm not saying they're bad or that you as a patient are even too challenging. It's just the nature of the healthcare system that we're in. We have doctors that are not qualified in environmental medicine and don't understand it very well, so they don't even know to look for it. And if your expectation is that they will, you're wrong. And if your expectation is that they're going to figure it out, they're probably not. And that's why you seek out an expert in functional care. That's why you seek out an environmental expert when you're struggling with those esoteric, oddball symptoms and autoimmune conditions. What about air conditioners and mold? The air coming out of it. Yeah, I mean, air conditioners can be a harboring point for mold. I mean, depending on the type of air conditioner and how it's maintained. Sometimes they're installed wrong, and you get condensation inside of them, and so mold can start to grow inside of them. So to me, one of the primary ways to prevent mold is to have a mold-literate HVAC person inspect your system, seasonally, to make sure that it's staying clean and that it's staying in good working order, and that the air pressures are what they're supposed to be, and the humidity control is what it's supposed to be, and that the dampers, if you have a fresh air intake, and that those dampers are set properly and not overexposing your indoor air to mold. It's all important. How to address exercise intolerance? Slowly. You go slowly. It's one of those things, if you don't know what that means, you probably should hire an expert who is experienced in helping people with exercise intolerance. Sometimes it's just as simple as chair exercises, and as you evolve from there, you can go to body weight, and from there you may be able to go to bands, and from there you may be able to go to lightweight, and from there you may be able to go to heavier weight. But it definitely, it's a transition. But if you're struggling and you're doing those things right, it's probably you're missing something, honestly. If you're exercise intolerant for a long time and you're not getting stronger, and exercise, just even at low levels, just crashes you or wrecks you, you're missing a piece of the puzzle. How about mushrooms and mold? So mushrooms are a type of mold. I guess ask me the question differently, Marianne. What do you mean, what about mushrooms and mold? What are you asking specifically about mushrooms and mold? Solution for bad bed sores is to not lay in the same position repetitively where the bed sores are forming. Bad bed sores are typically from being in bed and having pressure spots. And those pressure spots create irritation on the skin that lead to sore formation. So you've got to change your positioning. And then, as far as like helping, amino acids, branched chains, glutamine, even a full spectrum amino acid blend. We have something called ultra-aminos in that regard. Eating enough protein would also be a good solution. Taking adequate, really solid multivitamin to help give your body the nutrients that are necessary for that skin to heal back up. But sores, those types of bed sores are pressure sores, so you've got to remove the pressure or they're not going to go away. If it gets moist in the bathroom after showering, do you recommend using a dehumidifier? Yes. Or a fan. If you have a good fan that leads to the exterior of the home, either one would be okay. I would recommend, Martin, putting a hygrometer in your bathroom to monitor the humidity, just to see, because if the fan's not dehumidifying it properly after the shower, then you might consider a dehumidifier, a standalone dehumidifier as well. I tested negative on HLA-DQ2 and DQ8. Are these good markers? They're good markers for celiac disease, but they're not good markers for non-celiac gluten sensitivity. You have to measure the entire genome of the HLA-DQ. You have to measure for DQ1 and DQ3, which most doctors don't measure. They're looking at the T2 and the 8, and they're avoiding looking at the 1 and the 3, and you need to have the 1 and the 3 looked at as well. That's why at Gluten-Free Society, we offer that testing, because so many people come in saying, I don't have the celiac genes, but they have the non-celiac gluten sensitivity genes, and that's just as important. Oh, can we eat mushrooms? They're being promoted by many plant-based doctors. I mean, yes, you can eat mushrooms, but if you're in mold and struggling with a mold issue, there's the real risk that you're hypersensitized to mold and that there's a real risk of crossover reactivity. Now, some aspects of mushrooms can also be very immune supportive, like the beta glucans in mushrooms. And in some cases, we might even use beta glucan in somebody trying to recover from mold. But so it's one of those things that's kind of unique to the person. As a general rule of thumb, if you're in mold, though, I do not recommend mushrooms as a primary food at all. Tiny black dots on some of the t-shirts, is it mold? It probably, or it's probable that it could be. It's hard to know for sure. You can, I'd say if you've got tiny microbial growth on your t-shirts, it's time to get rid of them, throw them away. They're not worth the potential risk. And to test for it would be to cost more than to replace it. So let's see here. When taking the nutrient deficiency test, should you stop the supplements you take prior to the test? No, Kirsty, you don't have to. If you're using our test from Gluten-Free Society, you do not have to discontinue things. You do not have to fast. Our test measures an average. It's an outcomes test, so it's not what most people think about. It's an outcomes test. It's measuring the ability of your cells to function. And we're using lymphocytes, so it's measuring an average of the last 6 months. So you stopping your supplements today or tomorrow or the next day before that test is not necessary. It's going to give you a window of what you've done and how well your body's working over a 6-month time frame. Is there a best way to clean mold from washing machines? Yeah, wipe them out, wipe the moisture out or wipe them down every time you use them. That's, if it be, especially those front loaders where that moisture tends to accumulate. A lot of people will close the door on the washing machine and won't let the natural airflow get in there. So that moisture will get trapped, and that's how mold grows. So when you're not using it, keep it open. If you notice a lot of moisture and it's not going away well, consider wiping that moisture up after use to keep the potential for mold growth in them down. What humidity level do you recommend for the home? Under 55%. As a general rule, that's ideal. Keep it under 55%, depending on where you live. I mean, there's, if you're in Arizona, that's going to be a lot easier to do than if you're living in Houston, where I'm at in Texas. But your air conditioning unit should work well enough that it controls the humidity down to that level. And then if you want to set it lower than that, you can. But a lot of people, when it gets down in the 30% range, a lot of people complain of like your sinuses dry out and you start to get cracking in the nose. So I'd look at keeping it somewhere between 40 and 55%. That's a good range to reduce moisture for the potentiation of mold. How about mold in carpets? Get rid of the carpet. If you got mold in your carpet, rip it out. It's not doing you any favors. Carpet's really not ideal in homes. Ideal if you like carpet, get a rug that you can get cleaned or that you can take outside and beat. But the vacuums are an inefficient way to clean carpet. I mean, really, honestly, they kind of, it's a lick and a promise, but you get so much stuff that embeds into that carpet over time, and food, and kids spill things and adults spill things, and it just becomes a haven for mold to proliferate. And it's a chemical basin for most people. Carpets are made with, tremendous amount of chemicals. Good dietary source other than dairy. And one of the best is fish, like salmon. Canned salmon comes, the bones are pressure cooked, and so they're really soft and they're rich source of calcium. And broccoli is a good source of calcium too, Melinda. Check out our crash course on calcium. We talk all about that in there as well. Okay, what time is it? It's time for me to leave. We're an hour. We always go a little over, but my stomach's growling. That's why I know it's time for me to wrap it up. So thank you so much for tuning in. Look, if you do me a favor, if you got value from the show, hit that like button. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button. And if you think this information could help somebody you care about, share it with them. Together, we can help more people. And that's what it's all about. Remember, our motto here is save 100 million lives. That's our goal. That's my lifelong goal, is to help people survive and thrive in a world where socially it's acceptable to be sick and do things in an Alice in Wonderlandian-like fashion. So share if you feel like it's going to help somebody you know. Also, you can support us if you visit us at glutenfreesociety.org. We carry over 100 products there, including lab testing for generalized health. We're bringing out more lab testing later this year as well. So right now we're having a sale for 4th of July. You can use coupon code USA15 and save 15% off site-wide. That includes our genetic testing for gluten. That includes our nutritional deficiency testing, as well as over 100 different supplements, and our famous Warrior bread mix that is a grain-free bread mix for those of you that have that bread craving but don't want to eat the grains. So we appreciate your